Once upon a time, I thought about making this more comparative. To look at Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, size them up and say, well, I like this one better. I'm not here to detract from your enjoyment of either though. Honestly, I learned my lesson from last time I mentioned my opinions on such. It prevented people from engaging with the heart of the video that was about another series entirely. But you've already seen the title of this video, so let me say this. For a lot of folks, The Last Airbender is an early piece of fiction that conveys just how powerful the medium of animation can be, as well as the fact that kids' entertainment doesn't have to be a derogatory term. That's fantastic. Personally, I think it's good, and I had a whole lot of fun rewatching it for the first time. However, The Legend of Korra is genuinely one of my favorite TV shows, and it kills me to see so much of the conversation around it be so negative. So, if you would take a little time out of your day, maybe you'll come out of this with a sliver of appreciation for the divisive follow-up to the seminal Nickelodeon cartoon. In the realm of video games, the notion of a hub world is well understood. It's the base of operations which the player strikes out on their adventures from, or frequently returns to as some form of home city. Sometimes it is quite literally designed with the navigable space of the world branching out in different directions like spokes on a wheel. Other times a little looser and more so a place the player understands as the center of society, often serving as a melting pot of sorts to reflect towns and cultures beyond the city's border the player can encounter. There's the imperial city of Cyrodiil, or because I've had Mass Effect on my mind, the Citadel, which serves as the heart of the Milky Way. Now within the world of The Legend of Korra, we get a very similar concept. While Republic City isn't dead center of the map, it's generally centralized and was designed by Aang and gang to be a place where all four nations are melded together. A neutral ground of sorts where political disagreements can be negotiated and settled, with lives originating from all corners of the world tangled up with each other, a mutual interest. So Book 1 of Korra spends the vast majority of its runtime in Republic City for a number of reasons. Firstly, it immediately lets us know how much has changed from what we knew in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Secondly, it becomes a familiar sight which the audience can ground itself within. You get a sense for the different locales and districts. Also that when Team Avatar does strike out, we understand how all those seemingly individual places are interconnected. More to that first point though, Republic City is an utterly gorgeous backdrop, but it also is a point of contention, in part not solely because of disingenuous arguments, but rather, not super well informed ones. Over the years, one of the most common criticisms is, it's just 1920s New York but steampunk. That entire sentence is demonstrably, either way, incorrect. Let's tackle that first bit in the perception of the setting being Americanized. Whether it be ill-intended or not, this mode of thinking presents a narrow Western view. Because what exactly is American about this setting? Genuinely ask yourself that. Because when I see this argument made, it is often in regards to the architecture. Stone buildings with storefronts at the bottom, metal skyscrapers with a backdrop of an industrialized society. Maybe some Model T looking cars and some trams. A town crier on the street corner. None of these urban features are solely American. In fact, all the pictures you're seeing are of cities like Tokyo, Shanghai, Hanoi, Seoul, and Hong Kong. Which I think speaks to the perspective that unfairness is often the fault of bad education systems and nationalistic propaganda. The average person saying this is just 1920s New York isn't doing so with any intention of such, but the uncomfortable reality is very much there. Yes, the character of Shiro Shinobi, who announces the Pro Bender games and is the voice heard during the episode recap, is obviously stylized after American radio announcers. I have to imagine that's because this is a cartoon largely produced for an American audience on an American network with mostly American voice actors. There's an honesty to all that at least, because well, this is a franchise whose creative leads are almost entirely white Americans who enjoy anime and wanted to make a show inspired by such, forming its four countries as amalgamations of a variety of East Asian cultures, which admittedly is a conversation in and of itself, one I'll defer to more knowledgeable and directly affected voices on. Genres are weird. The lines are blurred and creators meld them freely. What's steampunk? To use the Wikipedia definition as a baseline, steampunk is a retrofuturistic subgenre of science fiction or science fantasy that incorporates technology or aesthetic designs inspired by 19th century steam-powered machines. I'd argue The Legend of Korra falls very much in the latter, if at all. What might be the most overtly steampunk-looking thing of the entire show are the designs of Book 1's villains, the Equalists. Less so their leader Amon, and rather the foot soldiers with the big goggles and shiny gold tubing. As well as the mecha they drive around. Much of the show is a pretty standard early 1900s look, from all the vehicles driving through the streets to the very normal architecture. I was talking to an artist on Discord who worked on a gacha game that had a steampunk styled event. They had to design outfits, and all the directions they were given from the game's leads were just, well, like normal fantasy, but make the colors brown and gray and add gears. Which speaks to how broadly people interpret the term. There are plenty famous pieces of fiction that have the steampunk label applied to them, but in spots that descriptor hardly comes through. Type steampunk games into Google, and quite a few well-known immersive sim franchises pop up, including Dishonored, BioShock, and Thief. There are absolutely areas where steampunk is dead on, but so much about those iconic settings isn't solely that genre, and more so just some sort of exaggerated American or British city from the late 1800s to the 1940s. In fact, Art Deco is more apt for the city of Rapture. In the world of anime, there are obvious examples like Princess Principal or Steam Boy. However, I've seen the label attached to Fullmetal Alchemist and even Baccano, which I'd argue is incorrect, but it supports my point. Again, genres are hard. To simply say Korra is steampunk is off, or rather when you just say steampunk, that can mean such a wide range of aesthetics, and Korra is more turn of the century industrialization with a side of steampunk. There's a hyperfixation across a lot of franchises against what we call retconning, essentially rewriting established lore. People often treat their favorite pieces of fiction like some sort of religious text, pretending it to be heretical to even alter the smallest of details. As I get older, I find myself being bothered less by properties changing hands numerous times and altering that foundation. Though it's certainly a case-by-case thing. For example, I'm not super tolerant of what Andromeda contradicts of the original trilogy, because for all intents and purposes, the gap in time isn't a great one. Plus, they live in an advanced society where they are able to meticulously record almost anything and have done so for a very, very long time. Something like Avatar, though, plays in a space more in line with Legends. There is an air of mystery surrounding how the world works, and even the most knowledgeable characters only have access to so much information. Plenty has been lost over time. That allows more wiggle room on stuff like why Korra doesn't struggle with fire but does with air. It doesn't necessarily contradict what happens with Aang and his lackluster earthbending early on as much as it offers another explanation. Often when I hear people talk about media, they'll mention likable characters. What a lot of folks seem to mean by that is someone they'd hang out with, maybe catch a movie or grab a beer. What they rarely mean is someone who isn't a good person, but a compelling character. I'm obviously generalizing here and more so in regards to just talking to average folks, not weirdos who are on the internet like me. I'd argue Hisoka of Hunter x Hunter or Char Aznable of Gundam are very likable. I mean, look at these guys, they're great. But they're heinous people. A good story doesn't always need a likable lead, it needs an interesting one. Someone that is human, and prone to all the faults we are. Someone like Korra. As we are introduced to our new avatar, wielder of all the elements and chosen one destined to resolve grand conflicts, she's a headstrong, loudmouth, pot-bellied little kid. Even with the immediate time jump, she's not all that different. She acts like someone who was told at a very young age that they are the most powerful human in existence and the reincarnated form of the latest in a long line of great heroes. By the time she's in her late teens, she's tired of being cooped up and coddled in a remote small town. She wants to put those skills to use in the big city and be the beaming icon of hope she was born to be. She's brash and often refuses to listen or see value in her airbending master and caretaker Tenzin's teachings. His conservative views around bending, especially in regards to the sport of pro bending, are just the opinions of a crotchety old man as far as Korra is concerned. Whatever good advice that is coming from a place of genuine concern, Korra ignores it all as she narrowly focuses on that which opposes her. How she goes about responding to Tenzin is, well, like a bratty teen, because she's a bratty teen. Her friends, referred to as Team Avatar, are all quite faulty too. Mako is just the most average male co-lead, but an actually interesting usage of that archetype over the course of the show. After failing in relationships with both Asami and Korra, he throws himself into his work to the detriment of his personal life, completely sidelining himself. Asami, meanwhile, like so many others including the Beifongs and Aang's descendants, has family issues. She's just so incapable of trusting anyone after her father turns out to be not so good of a guy. Bolin can't help but trust everyone all the time. He's just a lovable doormat, and by the start of book 4, he's really on the wrong side of things. But before all that, in book 1, they're messy, hormonal teens who can't be trusted in a room alone together despite their relationship statuses. And that's what I like about them. These imperfections cause continuous failures. From that, there is so much room for growth, being spurred on by the conflict with the show's fascinating villains. These foes are not only powerful, but often have valid criticisms of the accepted norms that Team Avatar and friends defend or operate within. Korra, despite being incredibly powerful, is still human, still young with so much to learn, and incapable of just rolling over the vast majority of the people she fights. While book 1 has its strengths, Korra's core direction of character development doesn't have its long-term plans solidified until book 2. Or at least the structure isn't super clear, but that would seemingly be the result of production issues, which we will get into later. Korra, who starts off as this hot-headed child, by the end of the series has gone through so much and comes out a different person, one befitting the title of Avatar. Okay, so I know I said I wasn't going to compare The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, but this was inevitable, and I promise it's for good reason. Airbender can often be a show about Aang becoming a better person through the inherent powers within him formed by destiny. He has his end goal in sight the whole way, and it is this grand chosen one fate to fight evil and restore peace. Korra is often trying to become a better person despite those inherent powers, and also without them. Aang does have plenty of growth of his own away from his role as Avatar, but ultimately it all leads to him needing to step into a role he was afraid of, to fulfill a predetermined fate. There's a lot more learning the basics, which I think is partially a result of the show needing to set things up for viewers given Airbender's place as the first installment of the franchise. Korra doesn't have to explain as much as this mysticism or spending so much time learning each form of bending, and thus we get a stronger focus on plain old Korra rather than Avatar Korra. This isn't to say one is inherently better than the other, but I certainly prefer the latter of the two. There's this really great moment at the start of book 3. After defeating her uncle and Vaatu, Korra's connection to the Avatar abilities have become tenuous, leaving her with this feeling of isolation. But something wondrous has resulted from her decision to leave the portal to the spirit world open. The Airbenders, who were once reduced to a single family, are growing. All over the world, random folks are getting the power to wield the winds. One new bender in particular is understandably left anxious and unstable by these dangerous skills. Having a run-in with Mako, the man is standing atop a bridge, surrounded by police and onlookers. He's terrified. Lin Beifong wants to take an aggressive approach, but Korra, who once would have done the same, casually climbs up, sits down next to him and talks, showing empathy from experience. Understanding that though this man's power and struggles with change are tiny compared to hers, it's all relative. To him, it's a monumental shift. That hothead who always thought she knew best is gone, kind of. Part of the reason I appreciate Korra is that despite what I suspect is an older viewer base than most Nickelodeon shows, it's still, well, a Nickelodeon show. Still about a chosen one, but this chosen one fails over and over, has to grapple with self-worth and finding her place. Despite all her power, she's just like anybody else and never really knows what she's doing. Which I think in a kids show is a really important message to have. When we're young, we think that people have it all figured out by the time they hit their mid-20s. Then the years go by and you realize that no one has it all figured out. That it's normal not to know what life might bring, or what future to strive for. That sometimes we're just learning to fail better. Much of Korra's journey is defined by this struggle, particularly in the first half of Book 4. In the wake of her traumatic fight with Zahir, she's left physically and emotionally broken. There's a 3-year time jump, which does the whole going off to college thing. While Korra has been recuperating, her friends have moved on and have found their callings. She is much the opposite, even after managing to regain the use of her legs. Instead of returning to Republic City like she had promised, she disappears and wanders the world alone, quite literally backpacking across it, again with the whole college years thing. Though she is physically fit, she can't return to the Avatar state and is still traumatized. Unfortunately, there are no easy solutions for Korra. It isn't a matter of simply removing the remaining bits of poisonous metal from her body, nor can any sage advice assuage her inner turmoil. She pushes forward, but the answers aren't just around the bend. Sometimes when we're in a dark place, we think we have the solutions we seek in sight, only to find nothing. With any piece of media, especially franchises, creators have to tackle previous installments, failing to critically think about the world and characters. This can be done so intentionally to set up compelling arcs for the future. In the case of The Legend of Korra, the show inherits a setting crafted by the leads of the prior series, a world that was plunged into a 100-year war due to an aggressive empire. The lack of balance brought on by the disappearance of the Avatar and the near genocide of an entire people. Despite Aang living up to his destiny and having a whole load of great people helping to shape the new world, there are still plenty of faults. Progress isn't rapid, but a slow evolution over long stretches of time, with ebbs and flows in conflicting directions. When The Legend of Korra begins, despite the establishment of Republic City, the Fire Nation is still ruled by a Fire Lord, the Earth Kingdom a monarchy. Benders are still the most defining and powerful force, physically and socially in most cases. Even Republic City is governed by a council of benders. All of this is a breeding ground for conflict. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, is one of my favorite games and probably my favorite piece of the Star Wars universe, in part because of how critical it can be of the accepted norms of its fiction. Much like the Avatar franchise, society and the stories of Star Wars are often focused on the most powerful beings, those who because of that power dictate the direction of the galaxy. But KOTOR 2 maligns the war between Jedi and Sith as an endless conflict that greatly costs the average people who aren't all that interested in either side. So with The Legend of Korra, Amon is someone who takes advantage of that frustration non-benders feel living in Republic City. They don't have a voice and continue to be caught up in the fights between benders who wield incredible powers that consistently cause collateral damage. When Korra first arrives in the city, she attempts to stop a robbery being enacted by some benders upon a non-bender store. In the process, she tears up the city. Right away, we also get class dynamics. Simply because Korra is the Avatar, she has lucked into a life where she has never needed for much of anything. Mako gets visibly frustrated by this when Korra claims she has no money too. Meanwhile, he and Bolin have grown up poor, have had to work somewhat dangerous blue-collar jobs, and even resort to crime in order to get by. Though they too have a degree of luck being born not only as benders, but skilled enough to participate in the sport of pro-bending. They may not be rich, but it creates the avenue by which they just happen to meet the Avatar and their lives are greatly improved, largely by chance. Something non-benders could never do. The show is also quite critical of how those in power react to criticism. Rather than strive to understand why Amon's revolution is happening, the council and police seek to completely snuff it out. They initially fail to see the very righteous answer to why this is occurring, which only exacerbates the issue, leading to this scene. With the corrupt council member Tarlok seizing power over the police, all equalists and those who sympathize with the rhetoric are put within a vice, placing a curfew on non-benders, but simultaneously cutting power to sections of the city populated by them, forcing the protest and thus giving the police cause to arrest them. Unfortunately, given the production issues in the constant unknown future, Book 1 rapidly wraps up. Great ideas and scenes like this exist but never receive a proper payoff. In the finale, Korra hits her lowest of lows as Mon is stripped of bending from so many, but then 30 seconds later she's back to her old self and heals literally everyone. Meanwhile, what learning and reformation that happens as a result of the righteous anger of non-benders isn't swept under the rug, but given a wink and a nod at best. Though the show never quite gains secure footing, the long-form storytelling and critical reaction to these conflicts is vastly better for the remainder of the series. Personally, I really love what Book 1 does conceptually, and the execution is largely there until the end. Despite Book 2 including a whole lot of ancient lore and having a heavy focus on the setting's spirituality, it's here the internal and external conflicts are given much more room to breathe and be tied into the overall arc of the series. With the particular dark demise of Amon and Tarlok, Book 2 begins with some big changes for Republic City. Most notably the disbanding of the council and the establishment of a democratic election. Finally, non-benders are given a great role in choosing the direction of the world. Now admittedly, the conflict between the northern and southern water tribes doesn't quite give me as much to say on theming and the like. I know a lot of folks, even amongst fans of Korra, think it's a weak season. I'm kinda curious how much of that has to do with the reliance on spirituality as influenced by East Asian cultures, and whether that really plays well with a Western audience, beyond the broad strokes. I mean, I do like the conflict and its resolution in regards to Korra's disdain for authority that puts her at odds with Tenzin and her father. The political flat-footedness of Republic City's new president is also interesting. The 2 episodes where Korra discovers the origins of the Avatar lineage. And maybe best of all is the reveal that Aang wasn't a perfect father, that among his 3 children, his attention skewed towards the lone airbender. How that left the non-bender Bumi and waterbending Kaya with their own issues. Bumi, despite being the oldest, still acts like a kid at times and has an inferiority complex towards his bending siblings. Kaya, in her frustration, left to wander the world and find herself, which her siblings saw as running from responsibility. Meanwhile, Tenzin is left with so much pressure upon his shoulders to guide the airbenders, and ends up looking down on his siblings sometimes. This all comes to a head in an episode that is highly reminiscent of The Last Airbender's very best episode, The Beach. Where the season really stands out is in its visuals. A large portion of the time is spent within the spirit realm, which is gorgeous. The usage of deep purples and blues alongside vibrant greens and reddish browns. The cell-shaded look of the spirit, how it all is so consistently framed in a way that makes me wish there were original cells to track down and hang on my walls. This on top of the show's absolutely killer fight choreography and impactful bending animation. Like, I will never tire of the exaggerated wind-ups everyone takes before unleashing some big attack. Then there's this. Though The Legend of Korra may be a sequel series, this is not Avatar: The Last Airbender 2. It will not mindlessly revere the past. Aang's story is over. This isn't his world anymore, and you, members of the audience that love The Last Airbender, need to accept such. In the wake of Book 2, the world of spirits and humans are no longer separate. Korra has corrected the mistakes of Avatar 1, and now spirit and man live side by side. However, within the Earth Kingdom, a reckoning is coming in the form of the franchise's most captivating villain. In The Last Airbender, the Earth Kingdom is, for starters, a monarchy with a puppet king who is being manipulated by the leader of the Dai Li, a sort of secret police that disappears dissenters and keeps its people in the dark about the war outside the capital city's walls. It's also maybe the place the series spends the most time, and we get to see a pretty broad spectrum, getting a taste for how stratified by class the city of Ba Sing Se is. In the several decades since, the Earth Kingdom remains. The Dai Li, though once defeated by Aang and gang, still exists and supports the monarchy. Class divide as well. For Mako and Bolen's long-estranged family, there are nearly 24 people living in one small home in the lower quarter. The current queen isn't a kind-hearted buffoon being taken advantage of, but a hateful tyrant who lives upon a mountain of stolen wealth. Enter the revolutionary philosopher, Zahir, a man whose plans lay hidden through much of the season. Alongside others after Korra kept the spirit portal open, Zahir has become an airbender. Unlike those others though, he's a devout follower of the teachings of the air nomad Guru Lohima, and well, he's been imprisoned as the result of attempting to kidnap Korra when she was very young. With his new powers, he breaks himself and his allies out of prison and sets in motion a plan to rebirth the lands of the Earth Kingdom from chaos. There are several reasons why Zahir is iconic to this day, one of which is that he achieves a level of power only one previous airbender has ever gained. Another being the very, graphic way he overthrows the Earth Queen. Lastly, he's kinda right about the state of the Earth Kingdom. Like, he's an anarchist, so the whole plan ultimately relies on the belief of no forced government structure, seemingly because he feels that such will always be taken advantage of by the rich and powerful, but otherwise, yeah, the Earth Queen needs to go. The people of the Earth Nation should absolutely take the power of directing their future into their own hands. The Queen and the Dai Li were never going to peacefully hand over power. Zahir's concerns over inherited power permeates into his plans for Korra too. Because as we have seen throughout the series, the Avatar's connection to Rava and the lineage of those who've come before is fragile. Also, what if one day the Avatar is reincarnated into someone who becomes a tyrant? Neither series really ever dives into this question, but it also doesn't seem outside the realm of a reasonable concern for someone living in this world. I mean, generally speaking, the air nomads are peaceful people, but in this season, we see that monolithic style of culture the franchise has built torn down. Zahir himself is obviously far more willing to dirty his hands. Then there is the matter of all the other new airbenders who Tenzin believes will come along with him and adapt to the traditional life of the monks. In reality, they're already people with their own lives. Anyone born an airbender, waterbender in the Fire Nation or Republic City didn't ask for such. That their thronish should not solely define selfhood. So what if one day the power of the Avatar falls into the wrong hands? And you know what? That's kind of what I really love about these later seasons. There's a lot going on. With the defeat of Zahir and the aforementioned time jump of 3 years, the final season of Korra sets itself up to see some major changes to much of what has been criticized. With Korra essentially out of the picture and the Earth Kingdom going through massive social unrest, in comes the final great villain. Kuvira stands in direct opposition of Zahir's anarchist philosophy. Those seeds of change he said would blossom from the chaos indeed have in the form of a power vacuum. While the established leaders are busy grooming their own puppet monarch, the resulting bloom is a big, beautiful flower of fascism. Oh, great, what a wonderful thing you've done here, Zahir. We now have a Hitler on our hands. Thanks, bud. Kuvira once served under Suyin Beifong, Lin's sister who has run the highly advanced city of Zaofu in the Earth Kingdom. Kuvira even pleaded with Suyin to take charge of the situation when Tenzin approached her about the matter, rather than give control over to another spoiled royal. In fact, Suyin could have very well been a good interim leader as they figured out a more permanent solution. Instead, Kuvira has executed a military coup and is claiming the surrounding territories. The Hitler and the World War II comparisons do continue, quite a bit. I mean, there's the talk of work camps. Tenzin takes an appeasement approach to Kuvira when she refuses to give up power. There's a race to develop a superweapon. The new Earth Empire even has a big old Gustav-like cannon. Little Miss Hitler at one point rallies her troops with plans to take Republic City, claiming it was stolen from them after the 100-Year War. Which is just the most, hey, y'all could have avoided this. You've been messing up for years. It's time for some serious change. Like, please, stop Mecha Hitler and make that happen. And you know what? They sorta do. I mean, the decision to end the monarchy and create a free election similar to that of Republic City doesn't come from who you might think, but nevertheless, the world that we arrived in at episode 1 of book 1 is very different from where the TV show wraps up. Okay, so there are a lot of common criticisms with The Legend of Korra that I simply do not agree with. I know, big shocker, I've only been gushing for seemingly an hour now. But there is no denying that while Studio Mir and Perro helped Korra achieve a visual splendor like few shows have ever before, it would seem Nickelodeon did their best to see The Legend of Korra sabotaged. I would have better understood if they came out and said, listen, we're really proud of the team behind Korra, we think they made some great stuff, but business is business and the show just isn't performing. It would stink, I would disagree, and be frustrated with how art is compromised by the entertainment industry, but I'd get it. No, instead the future of the series was in constant doubt since day one, which for long-form storytelling is understandably a problem. that would explain the hasty wrap-up to Book 1. And though Nickelodeon at least let them complete 4 full seasons, midway through Book 3, the show was taken off the air and relegated to Nick.com. I remember when this happened, and I was just completely befuddled. Like, what is Nick.com? Again, I get it. I get that they saw Korra get thematically weighty and more willing to display a degree of violence not typically shown in children's cartoons. When showrunners Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko proudly walked into the Nickelodeon's corporate offices and said, "Hey guys, look what we did for season 3. And then got to that episode, they probably weren't too hot on the whole suffocation by forceful removal of every cubic millimeter of air from the Earth Queen's lungs. But Nickelodeon did them dirty. Rewatching and being higher on Korra, even more so than I was as it aired, I'm feeling messy about some of this. In particular, how the lack of support from Nickelodeon during Book 4 led to the recap episode, and there are even a handful of panned over stills. I knew it was coming, so it was less of a shock, but even so, this isn't what the show deserves. What the incredibly talented people from top to bottom poured themselves into for years for. I'm trying to defend a show I love, and here are some really valid reasons to not enjoy it through no fault of anyone involved at the creative level. It's exhausting. Because more often than not, The Legend of Korra is an incredible looking show that has not only a consistent style, but when it steps outside, it does so purposefully. The dynamic camera moving through space giving depth to the environments. It displays brutality and fear in some spectacular ways. That big old kaiju fight, you're damn right that worked for me. There are even some shots of mass urban destruction that gave me pause. And well, now you might be thinking we can't have this discussion about production issues and network restrictions without talking about the final shot of the entire series. Oh, don't you worry, we'll get there. As this video has hopefully illustrated, I love The Legend of Korra. However, to know that the most popular video on it is an incredibly negative one that, yeah, has some issues, or that I couldn't even make what I thought was a silly throwaway joke at the start of my first Dragon Prince video, because it bothered hundreds of people so much that they posted cookie cutter comments personally insulting me or wishing death upon me. Korra deserves better, because it generally does something special. It, like its predecessor, paved the way for Western animation's continued evolution. It helped shed a light on how American cartoons are often animated not in America, and we kind of just presume they always are, and it's wrong and it's disrespectful to the people that make these things. But it was so important to the creators that they gave so much creative freedom to the studios over in Korea and Japan to make the show in a way that very few productions ever let happen before. It's important to remember that the Avatar fandom's average age may skew higher than most shows on Nickelodeon, but there are still plenty of kids who watched it back in the day. Plenty who will come across it now on Netflix and have a story about a hero who fails, about a hero who goes through the same problems they do. For young adults watching, they get to see someone who faces an uncertain future, that struggling to find yourself and feeling stagnant are completely normal. So, let's talk about that final shot, shall we? Much to Nickelodeon's displeasure, The Legend of Korra ends with Korra romantically setting eyes not upon Mako or any other male characters, but Asami. No, they don't kiss, it's just them holding hands and looking at each other in a way that suggests far more than friendship. Firstly, if you were to look at where Western cartoons are today, this may not seem like much in comparison to the very openly queer and progressive views of shows like Steven Universe or She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. The thing is, those don't happen without Korra. Korra was the one to break modern boundaries and explicitly have not just a non-hetero relationship in the background, but right there, dead center of the camera, and the last thing we might ever see of one of the most influential pieces of animation in the last couple decades. The common criticism around this development is there wasn't enough development, that it came out of nowhere and feels like some shoehorned in wokeness. To which I say, okay, at no point is the show as overt in building towards these romantic feelings as they are others. They never have a conversation about it prior, no one remarks on it. But that is an incredibly heteronormative lens by which to view this from. This criticism seems to operate under an assumption that to have a believable romance between two queer characters, you need to do something extra or special. Because straight romances just sort of happen undeservingly and we accept that. Queer folk are just as capable of falling for each other for the same mundane reasons straight people do. If we are ever to normalize this, we need to stop pretending like this is so different that it requires an abnormal amount of work to achieve. Something I adore about any piece of fiction, with caveats, are the communities surrounding such. Obviously, I'm not that big on the sections that act like children when you criticize the thing they love or, bigots, but there are large swaths of fandoms that are incredibly welcoming, celebratory of the fictional world they adore, and understanding of reasonable criticism. But mostly just so overflowing with love that they express it in cosplay, fanfiction, or videos like this. Honestly, one of the things that I am most excited about now that Netflix has brought Korra to their service is that for at least a week, my Twitter feed won't be a nightmare, but instead stocked with incredible fan art. Or maybe best of all the lo-fi remixes. No, seriously, I'm a sucker for this stuff. I mean, look at this one. It's called Chill Bending. It's just some moody remixing of great music from the OST set to gorgeous GIFs. It even goes so far as to insert dialogue from the show in a fashion that's just like how so much chill hop randomly throws in Alan Watts quotes to seem more profound. I love Uncle Iroh getting all philosophical in the middle of chill beats to study/relax to. It's absolutely wonderful. As my time with The Legend of Korra came to a close for a second instance, I found myself longing for those simpler moments. The fight to rise to the top of the pro-bending world, Korra being god-awful at driving, Team Avatar just getting to be kids. Because just as is with life, as we grow older and those easygoing times seem harder to come by, nostalgia is a warm comfort. A moment where we can more easily see all that we have before us. It would be simple to look at Book 4 and call that an improper conclusion. It's not some big send-off to Korra's story, and certainly not to the franchise. There is so much to love about this series and its cast. I could watch their stories for so much longer than Nickelodeon would ever allow. And you know what? There is more. Which makes it frustrating to see people so down on not getting some big send-off. The story never stopped, you just stopped paying attention. I've been diving into the comics that have come out since the show's end, and, well, they're fantastic. DeMartino still takes creative lead, and this time they've got some tremendously talented artists in Irene Ko and Killian Ng. And Korra as a series gets to have the life it couldn't fully obtain under the thumb of Nickelodeon's television production, which is really wonderful. Not only because the characters I love live on, but because the incredibly creative people behind them get more opportunities to explore their artistic expression, think about all those complex ideas and make mistakes along the way. But most importantly, continue to craft stories we, their audience, can find ourselves in. Okay, so a while ago, when Avatar hit Netflix, I sent in a group text with my friends a joke that I had written in regards to the release. Now, before I get to that, I'm going to ask you to consider donating to my Patreon. For $1 a month, you get access to some bonus posts, and your name will be here as a thank you of sorts. For $5, which is a new thing I'm doing, you can get behind-the-scenes commentaries, where I'll dive into some of the creative process and my thoughts on the video as a whole. Any amount in general is obviously very, very beneficial to me because I'm poor. And for those that have donated, thank you very, very much. So now that we're at the end of the video, and even if you get angry, you've already told the YouTube algorithms this is something they should promote, here's that joke. Avatar: The Last Airbender fans didn't mind that Netflix originally uploaded the 9 HD version of the show earlier this year because they don't have an eye for quality to begin with. Do you get it? Because, the high quality video isn't there. They never noticed it wasn't in high quality because they have bad eyes for quality.